Okay, right. So, good morning, folks. Good to see you again after your last couple of environmental sessions. This morning, we continue with the health, safety, and environmental module, and we could go back to health and safety matters this morning. And today's topic is asbestos. Fortunate today to have Stephen from G&L Consultancy to take you through this topic this morning. I'll let Stephen introduce himself in a moment and tell you a little bit more about what you're going to hear. Just a little bit of admin from myself, just to remind you, we are back to Wednesday next week, 11:30. It will be me again for the final session before Christmas, and then I'll be back with you again the first week in January again, and that will be this first of the 4 modules complete. Well done to those of you who have managed to get the coursework in and in early. For those of you that haven't, don't panic. If you remember, we're not looking for it until early January. So I know you don't want to be spending your Christmas holidays doing that, but if you do get a chance to do anything over the Christmas period or early New Year, just either upload it through the website or send it to me via email. For those of you that already sent it, I might get the opportunity to do some feedback before Christmas, but I have allocated a day or two early in the new year to both mark and set up short one-to-ones with each of you, just to give you some feedback on how you've been getting on. So don't panic if you're struggling with your first bit of coursework. The whole point of giving it to you is just to get you thinking about it and so that we can give you some valuable feedback on it. So that's my input today, except to say, because there's 2 of us on the call today, what can work quite well is, for those of you that are familiar with it, is the chat function. So Stephen will take questions at the end, but if there's anything as we're going through that comes to mind, if you just either stick up a public chat or send a chat message to me directly, I can make sure that Stephen answers your question towards the end. So I'll pass you over now to Stephen, and he'll take you through for the next hour.
How's it going, lads? As Roger said, I'm Stephen, work for G&L Consultancy in Banbridge up in the north. Some of you may have came across me in sites before, maybe some of you haven't, but what we're going to be looking at today is asbestos awareness, guys. So give me a wee second, I'll just get the PowerPoint on the screen and we'll make a start. Okay, everybody happy enough? They can see that? Okay, yeah, lovely. Okay, yep. Just maneuver this around 1 sec. Right, okay. So, as I said, I'm Stephen Connolly, work for G&L Consultancy. I am trained as a surveyor, so going out finding the asbestos. Also do some air monitoring, so that's air monitoring during removals, etc., for reinsurance purposes. And I also take the training courses for licensed, non-licensed training. Also do some mask fitting as well. So hopefully by the end of this, you will understand a bit more about the asbestos industry, what we can and cannot do. Hopefully you come away with something from this morning. As Roger stated, if there's anything you want to ask, drop it into the chat box and hopefully we can address that before you go. Or don't hesitate to drop us an email. As you can see my email address there. If you're ever unsure, drop us an email and hopefully we can help you. So just a quick caveat before we start. This is simply an awareness session, guys. So this won't entitle you to go out and remove asbestos. You need specific training for that. So we will touch on that later in the course. So this is basically just identifying it, what to do if something goes wrong, health implications, etc. So we'll look what we're going to look at this morning. So an introduction to asbestos, what it is, how it's born, where it comes from, all that kind of stuff, how it was used in the past. We'll then move on to look at the health effects of asbestos, so the damage it's doing inside our bodies. Number 3 is the legislation. So just before we start, everything that I'm going to kind of talk about is UK-based law. For you guys in the south, pretty much your regulations are pretty much exactly the same. They're slightly worded differently, but with the same outcome. There is one exception to the work categories. So before we start, I'll just touch on that. Occasionally, you'll see me holding this to the screen. Our red section is what we consider our licensed work category. So therefore, you need insurances, licenses, specific training to do all this stuff. That is for the more dangerous asbestos. We then have a blue section at the bottom, which is our non-licensed category. So that would be the likes of your asbestos roof sheets, your gutters, your downpipes, all the lower grade asbestos essentially. What we have in the north is a section in the middle, which is called our notifiable non-licensed. So this is where it gets slightly confusing. So I'll explain this before we start. So in the north, we have a notifiable non-licensed section. So essentially what that is, lads, is products that are considered as a non-licensed product that have maybe been damaged, maybe a fire damaged building. So therefore they've been broken up and disturbed. In the north, we have to notify that through a non-notifiable application form. It's an instant submission. There's no 14-day notices or anything. The only difference with the south, guys, is you do not have that section. So anything that we consider a notifiable non-licensed, so this purple section, will go up into your licensed work. So in the south, you have basically 2 work categories, whereas in the north, we have 3. So your notifiable non-licensed categories push up a category and go into your notifiable. So the wording in the south is a notifiable job or a non-notifiable job. So you'll hear me throughout talking about a licensed material and a non-licensed material, and then that middle section of notifiable non-licensed. So for your purposes, I'm just going to call it notifiable and non-notifiable because that's the way that you guys would be treating it in the south. Other than that, we'll look at legislation. As I stated at the start, it's pretty much exactly the same, guys. It's worded slightly different, same outcomes. The only thing with the south is you guys, when you're transporting waste from a site to usually Rialta in Dublin is usually where it ends up, you guys will have to fill in a different form that states the counties that you will be transporting it through. So to give you an example, if you're removing something in Cork and you are getting it sent to Dublin, you need to notify the authorities which counties in which you will be going through to get to Dublin. So my geography is not the greatest, but you guys are going to know where it needs to be transported through. In the north, your waste transport license will allow you to move freely throughout any of the counties in the north. So that's another slight difference. So that is our legislation, guys. We'll look more in depth than that. We will also look at asbestos containing materials. So we're going to go through everything on this chart from our most serious, dangerous asbestos type down to our lowest risk type. So hopefully by the end of this, you will understand what you can and cannot do with certain types of asbestos. Then the most important for you guys to take away from, Roger stated that there potentially could be a question in your exam or one of your assignments surrounding asbestos, and maybe about planning or a job, maybe in an old building, for example, and things that you would have to do that if you came up against asbestos, basically. So probably section 5 and 6 is probably the most important one for you to take away. So that is emergency procedures and how to avoid the risks of asbestos. So that's the 6 topics we're going to look at, guys. We're pretty tight on time, so apologies if I move pretty fast through this because there's quite a lot to get through in 1 hour. So again, drop a question into the chat box and we can hopefully answer that at the end. So what is asbestos? It's basically a naturally occurring mineral that forms in the ground. Over years of metamorphic pressure, it basically turns it into a rock. In that rock, we have what are called veins that run through that rock. So that is where that mineral has deposited over time. And over time, that will turn into asbestos fiber. That fiber the fiber that's taken from the rock is made and produced, obviously, into the products that we know today. So there's anywhere between 3,500 and 4,000 products, lads, that it was made into. The obvious ones that you guys are going to probably see more often are like your roof sheets, the likes of your gutters, your downpipes. We'll also look at the more dangerous types of your pipe lagins, your spread coatings, etc., etc. So we'll look at all those in a while, but basically that's where it comes from a rock. That fiber is extracted from the rock, which you'll see in a second here. I'll just move through that now, sorry. So it's extracted from the rock, as you can see here. There's obviously production that it was done. It was removed from the rock. It was basically ground up into a powder form. And as you can see, these guys are dealing with the powder, the end product essentially. It was then placed in bags, and that was transported around the world to wherever it needed to go to. So traditionally, shipyard workers, construction workers were very, very high on the list of people that were being exposed to this. Obviously, these guys in 1936 had no idea what they were handling on a daily basis. So that was the how it was basically taken from the rock and made into various things. So a brief history, we'll just kind of touch on this. The Finnish were using it as far as 4,500 years back. They were using it to strengthen pots and cooking utensils. So already in that time frame, they were starting to understand that asbestos was used a lot of times to make things stronger. So again, today, a lot of the examples of how it was made or how it was used was for tensile strength. The Greeks were using it in their clothing and their lamp wicks. In medieval times, it was used extensively as insulation in suits of armor. The Industrial Revolution represented a huge boom for the industry. Factories were opening everywhere, and new uses for the miracle mineral were being devised on a regular basis. So I don't know if any of you guys are aware, there was a pretty big asbestos factory in Kildare, Tegral. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or came across it, but Tegral in Athy in Kildare was one of the main production factories essentially for those corrugated sheets. So a lot of cement products would have came out of Athy and transported around the south for where it was needed. It wasn't until the 1880s that it was mined commercially in Canada, closely followed by Russia and Africa. So three of the main players in taking it out of the ground were these guys, the Canadians, the Russians, and the Africans. So probably won't surprise any of us, the Russians still in 2020 are taking it out of the ground today. They're actually using only a small percentage. I think they use 6% of what they take out of the ground. The majority of Russian asbestos gets exported to developing countries. So the likes of India, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, a lot of those countries would take Russian asbestos still today. In the UK, the commercial use of asbestos began around the end of the 19th century, and it increased rapidly after World War II. So obviously after the war, there was a lot of destruction, buildings were smashed up. This was a readily made material. It was easy to get your hands on. And the main reason probably why it was used, guys, like most things today, was cost. It was a cheap material to get your hands on. Little did they know that 30, 40, 50, 60 years later, that there was going to be an epidemic of chest problems, lung problems due to using this material. The greatest use of asbestos was from around the 50s to the 80s, especially in system build housing. So for you guys in the south, it would be your council houses, essentially, assisted living, your refurbishment of older buildings, factories, and schools. So basically any of those guys, mainly in the south, you get a lot of it in your system build housing, so your council houses, older buildings, factories, and schools. As I said, any government funded building would have a lot of this installed through that period. So if you're doing any work on any buildings through that period, guys, ensure you're checking there is an asbestos register, and basically identifying where that asbestos is before you plan your works, because there's nothing worse than starting a job, you've never checked your register, and then maybe you coming up against a licensed material, and that could maybe hold you back a month, 6 weeks before that's removed, so you can move on. So again, planning phase of your jobs, ensure you're checking, is there asbestos present? So this was the amount installed into the UK, guys. There, we'll look at our three colours in a second here. But as you can see at the bottom, 2.7 million tonnes of Chrysotile, which is our white asbestos. There was a significant amount more of that stuff installed. Now, it is considered the least risk of the three, but in terms of quantity installed, there's a hell of a lot more of that installed throughout the UK. That would be applicable in the south too, as well, guys. So a few uses from few years gone by, let's just say that. Hopefully nobody is smoking these Kent cigarettes today. Kent cigarettes, as you can see, if you can see my cursor moving, promoted their cigarettes as a healthier smoke due to the micronite filter. So the filter in the cigarette was there to take out obviously your bad chemicals, but little did they know in Kent cigarettes that it was blue asbestos that they used in the cigarettes. So little did these guys know, they thought they were getting a healthier cigarette, but they were actually inhaling probably the most dangerous asbestos that you could inhale. So that's the core section of a cigarette filter with blue asbestos, as you can see. Other household products, it was used in everything up from on the left with dental toothpaste. It was used on the right-hand side, that was artificial snow. So coming up this time of year, decorating trees, etc. That was basically boxes of 100% Chrysotile asbestos. Famous movie that it was used in, you'll see here in a few slides, it'll appear. So it's appeared, as you can see, a few times on the telly in pop culture. So the Simpsons have talked about it a few times. Famous movies that it was used in, top left, The Wizard of Oz. I'm sure most of you have seen that before, or your kids have seen it. That snow scene there is basically those guys drenched in 100% Chrysotile white asbestos. So it was used to basically simulate a snow scene. Bottom left of the picture, you can see the world's fastest Indian. Don't know if any of you have ever seen it. I would recommend to watch it. It's a good watch. He was trying to break the world land speed record in his motorbike or trike or whatever it was. And as a precaution, he wrapped his legs in an asbestos fire blanket. So those really thick fire blankets you used to get years ago, basically for protection of his legs if his vehicle went up on fire. On the right-hand side, lads, you can see the Star Wars trilogy. There's probably more of them now. There's about 5 or 6 of them. In the 80s and stuff, they would have used a lot of asbestos in their filming. A lot of time for fire protection purposes and reasons. As you can see here, they're doing a stunt with fire. They would have used asbestos a lot of the time because it could have been easily extinguished at the end. Right, if there's anything you could write down from today's session, guys, I would recommend you write 1, 2, and 3 down. So these are our 3 asbestos types and colours. So Chrysotile is our white asbestos. As we said, this is the one that you are most likely going to come up against. It's in a high percentage of asbestos products. Some asbestos products can have mixes of both. So you could have Chrysotile and Amosite, Chrysotile and Crocidolite. The likes of those roof sheets, gutters, downpipes, all of those things that are common predominantly are made up with Chrysotile white asbestos. So Chrysotiles are white, Amosite is our brown, and Crocidolite is our blue. So structurally they're different. We're going to look in a wee second here. I'll just give you a second to write that down. We'll look at appearance and colour here in a second, how they differ. I'll just give you another few seconds to scribble that down. Okay, if you need to write that down later, guys, you can give me a shout and I'll go back to that slide for you. So Chrysotile is our white asbestos. You can see a section of ore on the left-hand side. All of these fibers are described as wavy, flexible fibers. So in terms of risk, these would be considered probably the least risk of the 3 fiber types due to its makeup and due to its appearance. I'll explain in a second why the other 2 are different. So we would call these a wavy fiber. So you can see on the right-hand side, they're a wavy fiber. So how they differ from the others, this is our Amosite. So Amosite is our brown asbestos, like you have wrote down. These are defined as needle-like fibers. So once these are breathed in, they're essentially piercing into the lining of your lungs and also the alveoli, which is your gas exchange region within your lungs. And therefore, they're very, very hard to get dislodged from your lungs. So essentially, once these guys are breathed in, they're piercing and they're staying in there. Our third and final type is our Crocidolite. So Crocidolite, we would consider the most dangerous of the 3 types. So for the last section, I kind of scribbled it on a piece of page. I'll hold it up to the camera. Why we consider this one the most dangerous, the makeup of this fiber looks very similar to that. So the fibers are needle-like pointed fibers, but on those fibers are what we would call hooks or barbs. So think of a fishing hook as the easiest way to visualize it. Once that fishing hook gets wedged in the fish's mouth, it's very, very difficult for it to get dislodged. So Crocidolite is the most dangerous of the 3 types due to its appearance and its makeup on those barbs and hooks. So that's our 3 types, guys. Physical properties, why it was used. So although we said at the very, very start, cost pretty much was the main reason why it was used. They called this material back in the day the miracle mineral. So it ticked a lot of boxes for properties. So here's a lot of the properties as to why it was used. So it was good for thermal insulation. It was stable at high temperatures. It was used for fire protection a lot of the time. Good electrical insulation. It was moisture retardant. So the likes of your linos and papers on floors that stop moisture passing through in the kitchens, etc. Resistant to chemical attack. It does not degrade easily, so you get a long lifespan out of asbestos products. So the likes of your corrugated roof sheets. That's why all those farmers out there have got those on their shed roofs. They want to get an extra 10 years out of them. So that's why they chose asbestos back in the day. And probably the other reason was cost, probably came into that as well. And the last one was frictional resistance. So you would have seen a lot of vehicles in years gone by with asbestos brake pads and clutch plates, etc. But as I said at the start, cost was probably the main reason as to why that was used. So bans, if you want to even scribble down beside your Chrysotile, Amosite and Crocidolite, the ban dates. So as you can see, Amosite and Crocidolite were banned in 1985. So from that date on, you were forbidden to install anything with Amosite or Crocidolites. So that would be the likes of your spread coatings, your AIB boards, etc., your thermal insulation. So essentially all the really nasty licensable materials, okay? So that would be the red stuff at the top of our chart. Chrysotile, as you can see, was banned in 1999. So if you're ever asked when was asbestos banned, 1999 usually is the answer that you would give for that. There are some exceptions, lads, in year 2000 properties, so just be aware of that. You will get a small percentage of year 2000 constructed properties will have asbestos in it. That happened because the government, the HSE, would have given a lot of waivers basically to companies that were saying, right, well, we've got 6 months worth of supply left of this stuff. What do we do with that? So essentially they were given the thumbs up to use that up. Once it was used, no more could be installed. So 1999 was the ban date. Year 2000, just be on the lookout. If you're ever maybe out pricing a job or looking at a job, just double check, make sure it's surveyed essentially properly. Okay, that's us moving on to health effects, guys. I know we're moving really fast, but I'm just conscious on time. Again, if there's anything you want to ask, just pop it into the chat. So health effects, asbestos-related diseases will kill more than 5,500 people each year in the UK. Diseases can take anywhere from 15 to 60 years to develop. So it's important that when we're working around asbestos, we're putting all of these controls in place. We're wearing a mask or wearing a suit. You're not getting your clothes dirty, etc. Because obviously this isn't going to affect you tomorrow or next week or 3 weeks. It's going to be in later life that it will affect you. So unfortunately, it's guys that worked maybe in the shipyards in the 50s and 60s, potentially are only getting these diseases in recent years. So yeah, it's important that we basically act now around asbestos. Current deaths we're experiencing at the minute are from exposures that happened between the 50s and the 80s. So that's where predominantly the most amount of deaths are coming from that exposure time. So who's at risk now? Essentially anyone, lads, that's going to be disturbing the fabric of a building. So it could be anything from drilling a hole through a wall to popping up a ceiling tile to see what's above a suspended ceiling. So all of the work jobs are industries, plumbers, electricians, demo workers, joiners, plasterers, essentially anybody, lads, that's going to be out there disturbing something. So I'm sure you could all put yourselves into one of those categories. Maybe not. Essentially, I would say probably plumbers, electricians are probably at most risk due to being around a lot of pipe work a lot of the time. Maybe rerouting cables through suspended ceilings, etc. So those guys, personally, I would say are probably slightly higher on the list. These are in no particular order, by the way. So health effects of asbestos, back to that. These fibers that we breathe in are a particular problem because of 3 things. So their size. Asbestos fiber can be floating around a room that you're occupying or working in, guys. There is no way that your human eye will detect a fiber floating in the air. They're microscopic fibers, anywhere between 3 and 5 microns in size. So you're talking hundreds of centimeters in size. So to visualize that, I can show you in a wee second. But basically, you're not going to be, your eye will not detect them. The only way of detecting fiber in the air is through air monitoring. So air monitoring pumps can be installed outside of a workplace, close to a workplace, close to where other people are potentially working. And that way you're giving reassurance to those people that they are not being exposed to that during your works. So something to consider if you are doing works, whether it's a license, obviously you guys don't think are going to be doing licensed work, but if it's a non-licensed job and you're potentially removing a roof beside a school, it's probably good practice to get some air testing done in close proximity to that school, so that if it ever comes up, how do we know our peoples were not exposed, etc. You've got proof that they weren't exceeded above a control limit, etc. Second problem is their ability to split into finer fibers. So if that was an asbestos fiber, they're always going to split down the middle. So one fiber essentially can become 2, become 4, become 8. As it says at the bottom, they can remain airborne for long periods of time, and that's when the damage is being done, when you are breathing it in. Third and final one is its resistance to chemical attack. So once that fiber gets inhaled into the respiratory system, chemicals, essentially white blood cells, will come and try and dislodge those fibers, and basically it'll kill off those cells, and therefore that fiber will remain lodged in the lungs. So this is just a visual to give you an idea. A human hair is roughly in around 100 microns in size. Respirable dust, which we consider asbestos, is 4 microns in size. So just to visualize that basically you're never going to see this fiber floating in the air. So again, going back to air testing, stressing the importance of getting that done during removal works, etc. The likelihood of contracting a disease will depend on several factors. So the concentration of asbestos to which one is exposed. So if you're dealing with like a really concentrated piece of asbestos, like a spread coating to the underside of a factory building, for example, there's going to be a lot more concentration of asbestos fiber in that product compared to the likes of a vinyl floor tile. So in terms of this chart, we'll have a look at this a couple of times before he's head off. Your highly concentrated materials are all of your licensed materials, okay? Essentially all of these things at the bottom, which is our lower risk materials, will have a lower concentration of asbestos, hence why there's less controls, etc. needs to be put in place while removing them. The duration of exposure, so how long have you been exposed to that asbestos? Little do you know, you can be getting into a workplace every day, maybe with a corrugated cement sheeted roof that could be damaged. You could be breathing that in on a daily basis. So depending on how often you're breathing it in will depend on how quick that you will pick a disease up. And then the third one is your individual immune system. So obviously everybody's immune systems are slightly different. So that will factor into the likelihood of you picking up one of these diseases. So apologies on the image, guys, it's kind of overlapped. I tried to change it there on the break, but it didn't seem to work. So on the left-hand side, you can see a set of lungs. The damage is being done to the pleura, which is the pinkish lining around the outside of the lung. Pleural plaques, which is one of the non-fatal diseases, can lead to calcification around the outside of the lung, therefore restricts gas exchange, etc. Other problems we have is with the alveoli, as you can see at the bottom of the diagram. That is where our gas exchange happens. So your oxygen and your carbon dioxide merging together to basically give us energy. As you can see on the right-hand side, asbestos fiber will get lodged in this alveoli, and therefore the efficiency of that gas exchange will severely decrease. Therefore, you will get lack of oxygen being pumped around your body. So the first of the non-fatal diseases we'll look at is asbestosis. It's usually the one everybody remembers because it's got the word asbestos in it pretty much. This is to do with the scarring of the lung tissue. So this scarring will impair the elasticity of the lung, so essentially the stretchiness, okay, and hampers the ability to exchange blood gases, creating inadequate oxygen levels in the blood. So the symptoms with this one will be shortness of breath and coughing. and is usually diagnosed by a patient's history, specifically having been exposed to asbestos. So this one's to do with your scar tissue, essentially, so what you've seen in this image here. So again, going back to the elasticity of the lung, you can see this lung on the left-hand side is totally fine. Everything's fine. On the right-hand side, the whole bottom section of this lung has been severely restricted due to asbestosis. The elasticity, essentially the stretchiness, so when you take a deep breath in, the tidal volume in which you take into the lung is a lot lower than a healthy functioning lung. So the second is our lung cancer. Lung cancers caused by asbestos are indistinguishable from those caused by smoking or other agents. However, the effects of smoking and asbestos have made lung cancer the most common type of cancer to cause death in the population as a whole. Smoking and asbestos exposure multiply the effects on the lungs, and in doing so, the likelihood of contracting a lung cancer. So if you're working around asbestos, guys, on a regular basis, and you are a smoker, the damage being done on your lungs is approximately 53 times more damage being done to your lungs. So it's stressing the importance of wearing a mask, wearing a suit, making sure you're clean shaven, making sure your mask fits correctly. How do we know that? That's ensuring you've had a face fit done. Everybody just assumes you can stick a mask on and it's going to protect you. In terms of asbestos regulations, north and south, they will both state that you must have a face fit done, okay? So it's no good just handing your men a mask, or women, ladies, whoever it is, and saying, stick that on, that's going to protect you. You need proof that that mask suits that operative. So the only way of doing that is through face fitting. So like any other cancer, guys, it's a cancerous tumor will form in the lungs or whatever part of the body. Specifically here, we're talking about the lungs. And like any tumor, it's got the ability to grow through surrounding tissue, spread throughout the body. So again, going back to controls, making sure you've got a mask fitted correctly, you're wearing it correctly, you've done your checks on it, and obviously the smoking thing, as we touched on, ensuring, well, I'm not here to tell you to get off cigarettes, but it's something to think about if you're around asbestos a lot and you do smoke, it's something to think about. So the last one we're going to look at, lads, is mesothelioma. So mesothelioma are cancers of the pleura, which is the lining around your lungs, and the peritoneum, which is the lining around your abdominal cavity. So they largely form after exposure to asbestos. So mesothelioma has a direct link with asbestos exposure. The delay between first exposure and effect is longer in mesotheliomas than for other cancers, but possibly never less than 10 years. As with lung cancer, increased exposures increase the likelihood of developing a cancer, but not the speed at which it develops. So you can see, just to visualize it, you can see on the left-hand side, you have mesothelial tissue, which goes around the lung. So it's this area that's getting affected by the asbestos. And you can see on the right-hand side, we have a diseased lung. So what happens, that mesothelial tissue breaks down and fills with fluid. That fluid will basically suffocate the lung. So it's not directly the lung being affected, it's basically starving that lung of the ability to inflate and deflate, okay? So that is our 3 diseases, non-fatal diseases. Again, we're moving pretty fast through this, guys, so if there's anything you want to ask, just pop it in the chat and we will move on to legislation. So just to briefly touch on, we'll touch on at the start. Remember, the legislation we're going to look at here is UK based. Remember, everything we do in the asbestos industry is pretty much replicated in the south, with the odd exception, the work categories, which we've talked about, and also the transportation of waste throughout certain counties. So your waste transportation form is slightly different to ours. Other than that, guys, your regulations are the same as ours, okay? So in the south, you're going to have your Health and Safety at Work Act. In the north, we call ours the Health and Safety at Work NI Order 78. Okay, so basically that is your law within the Republic of Ireland. Okay, so it's going to sit at the top of the chart. Then we have our approved codes of practice below that. So that is guidance given out by the HSE or A to accommodate asbestos removal non-licensed. I will show you after we look at the regulations our work categories for approved codes of practice, the guidance, and where you can get your hands on that if you ever need to have a look at it. So as we said, we've got our law, we've got our approved codes of practice below that, which is guidance. You can choose your alternative methods, but it basically helps you follow the law. And then below that, we have all of our regulations. So I'm sure whatever industry you guys are in, you have a set of regulations for that, whether it's, I don't know, electrician, I'm sure there's building regulations. For our specific industry, it is the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012. So these regulations require employers to protect employees and anyone else who may be affected by asbestos. The employer must reduce the risk of exposure. So that is sending his operatives on courses, whether it's removing the asbestos, whether it's sampling. So you could do a surveying course, or if it's managing asbestos within a premises, there's a P405 qualification you can do if you're the designated premises manager or health and safety manager. Other things you must ensure is you're giving them the correct RPE, PPE training before they do particular tasks. So as we said, with masks, etc., it's no good just handing somebody a mask and a suit and saying, get on with it. Teaching them how to use it, making sure they're face fitted, making sure that the mask fits them, all those kind of things. The line below it is probably more important. Employees have a duty to cooperate. So employer has given all of the controls, all of the regulations they must follow, etc., but it's up to that employee to cooperate. So we're going to look at the key regulations. There are over 25, guys. We're only going to look at the main ones that are applicable for this course. So Regulation 4 is the duty to manage asbestos in non-domestic premises. So just as a pure example, to give you a bit of a visual on what needs to be done, we're going to talk about, we'll say, I'm from Banbridge in the north. We're going to talk about Tesco's in Banbridge, just to give you a visual. So if you are the premises manager of Tesco's in Banbridge and there is asbestos in your premises, you must follow this Regulation 4. So basically, owners and occupiers of non-domestic premises who have maintenance and repair responsibilities for the premises have a duty to assess them for the presence of asbestos and the condition. So if Tesco's Banbridge has asbestos present, every year, every 12 months, they must get a management survey done. A management survey is basically a surveyor going in and checking the location and the condition of that asbestos within that 12-year period or 12-month period. Surveyor will then issue a report, asbestos register or a survey, and that is to help the client basically manage the asbestos within the premises. So we could give recommendations, things like urgent removal. So if something is really badly damaged, we would recommend get it removed as soon as possible. It could be as simple as repair it, encapsulate it, which is painting it, locking it down, or the thing that most clients want to see in their report is manage and review. So that means simply that the asbestos is in good condition, it's fine, it's no risk to anybody. We will come back again in 12 months and check it. So if you're doing any work in a building that has asbestos, ensuring that your employees are reading the asbestos register, asking the premises manager or health and safety person, is there asbestos present? If there is, ensuring they're reading the register so that they understand where it can be found or located. So that's our management survey every 12 months. Any refurbishment works that has to be done within a building that contains asbestos must have a refurbishment survey done. So the client will tell the surveyor exactly what works are being done, and they will give them a scope of works, i.e. areas to check that could potentially be damaged or disturbed during the works. So say an electrician's coming in to fit new lights and the whole ceilings are asbestos, it must be surveyed around all of those areas where he potentially could be disturbing. And then the third and final one, guys, is a demolition survey. So a demolition survey is a more intrusive survey that basically locates all of the hidden asbestos that could potentially be hidden and not visible to the eye. So that could be things like packers behind door frames, under windowsills, etc., that you're never going to detect in a management survey. So a demolition survey must be done before a building is demolished. Once all the asbestos has been identified, it must be removed correctly. Then that certificate gets handed over to the demo guys, who can then follow on and demolish that building. Regulation 7 is to do with plans of work. So hopefully you are all familiar with plans of work, risk assessments, etc. This must be prepared before work starts. Employees are to be aware of and follow its content, and it must be available on site. When must a plan of work be done, guys? Anytime you are working around or near asbestos or removing asbestos, you must have a plan of work. Okay. Regulation 8, this only applies to companies that are going to be removing licensable materials. So for guys in the south, your terminology would be notifiable products. So for this chart, it is all your red products. Okay, so that's the likes of your coatings, your insulations, your AIB boards, etc. Your company must obtain a license to remove that. All your staff must be trained accordingly. They must be face fitted for a full face respirator. All of those things must be done. There's a lot more things, training, medicals, etc. Moving on, Regulation 10 is information, instruction, and training. So every employer must ensure that information, instruction, and training is given to all employees who are liable to be exposed to asbestos. So if any of your guys out there are removing non-notifiable asbestos, like roof sheets, the lower risk stuff, they must be trained. They must have an operatives card. They must have a medical done every 3 years. They must have a face fit certificate done every year. So all of these things must be done, because if HSA or arrive out on site, and it's usually the first thing they're going to be asking the supervisor for. So non-licensed training can be done in 1 day. Licensed training, that allows you to remove the notifiable, in your case, items, and that would be a 3-day course to do that. And then the awareness training is basically the course we're sitting today. So remember, guys, this isn't going to allow you to go out there and remove it. You need the other 2 courses to be allowed to do that. Regulation 11 is the prevention or reduction of exposure. So you want to always ensure during any works, you're either preventing an exposure or reducing significantly the exposure to which your employees. So that's choosing the suitable work methods. If you're working around asbestos, making sure you're using the right control measures. You've got a H-type vacuum at hand, etc. It's got DOP tested, etc. Correct use of RPE and PPE. So ensuring every time you wear your mask, it's been inspected, visually inspected, making sure all your filters are in place, etc. It's white, it's clean. PPE, correct use of suits. Simple things like work boots, guys. You cannot be working around asbestos with laces in your boots. So things like that, ensuring you have the correct RPE and PPE to do any of those works, and then best practice also. Regulation 16 is all about the duty to prevent or reduce the spread of asbestos. So something that the HSE and A like to really clamp down on is ensuring that you are not moving asbestos away from the workplace, ensuring you're personally decontaminating, you're getting rid of suits, you're getting your masks wiped down, etc. You've got correct waste and transit routes. So basically anybody can go on site and know your no-go areas. You've got signage up. Basically, they do not want you spreading it from the workplace. So that's stressing the importance of cleaning your work area down, changing your suit, cleaning your mask, etc. before you leave work areas, etc. So that's all to do with Regulation 16. So they are our regulations, guys. As we said at the start, we have our health and safety at work, and then we have our approved codes of practice. Guidance, approved codes of practice is basically guidance issued by the HSE. It is not compulsory and you're free to take other action, but failure to follow the code or regulation is punishable by fine or imprisonment. So the book that I was talking about, this one, guys, I would highly recommend. I'm not 100% in the south the title of the book, but this one will be exactly the same for removal techniques. Highly recommend you either buy a copy of it. This will show you step by step how to remove your non-licensed asbestos to the letter of the law. It also goes over things like bagging of waste. It also talks about personal decontamination. If you type in asbestos essentials into the HSE website, that's the co.uk version, you will be able to download this for free, or you can buy it for your office. I think it's about €15 or so. We'll probably get you a copy of it. But basically that is your approved codes of practice for the asbestos industry. I would imagine in the south they have a document very, very similar to it. But if you're stuck and you can't get out your hands on it, you can go and follow this one. Right, so we're going to look quickly, guys. We're kind of moving on with time, so I'm going to move through these pretty quickly. We're going to look at all our types of asbestos, from most dangerous, which is our loose insulation, you can see top of the chart, and we're going to move down to our reinforced products. So the loose fill insulation, the first first six for you guys will be considered your notifiable sections. Okay, so once we're going through them, I will tell you your license section or your notifiable section and your non-notifiable. So as I said, it's slightly different in the north and the south. So this is your loose insulation, guys. You rarely will find this. Be on the lookout for it. It basically looks like your fiberglass, old fluffy fiberglass. It's usually grey in appearance or a dark blue color. You will find this potentially under floorboards. I don't know if any of you guys work in the north. If you're working anywhere close to the docks in the Belfast, be on the lookout, because a lot of this would have been pinched probably by workers bringing it home to insulate lofts, etc. back in the day. Be on the lookout. Again, close to the docks in Dublin, I would imagine there was probably the same scenarios happen. Yeah, so basically it's a loose insulation. It's the most fibrous of the three. Concentration of asbestos is pretty much pure asbestos, and it's usually the brown and blue type. So just be on the lookout under floorboards, etc. Around cables coming through plasterboard, etc. It would have been found there. So second on our list is our spread coatings, usually applied to undersides of buildings, warehouses, steel structural parts of buildings, frames, H-beams, etc. Basically, it was just spread on, as you can see the guy on the left-hand side. It was usually for fire protection this stuff was installed. Appearance-wise, guys, most of the time you're going to see it like that. It looks fluffy in appearance, cloud-like. But again, don't be fooled by that, because sometimes it can have a trowel finish, so it can have a smooth finish. It looks very similar to cement sometimes. So again, if you start drilling at something, make sure you have it checked before, making sure that it's on the survey. You've checked that there's no coatings to roofs, etc. before you're doing any of that work. That would be considered for you guys a notifiable job. Again, another notifiable job, what we would call thermal insulation. Most of you guys will probably refer to it as pipe lagging. Pipe lagging, as you know, is going to be surrounding pipes. Also can find it in boilers, calorifiers, pressure vessels, basically any product that can be inside a boiler room that gives off heat. Sometimes it was hand applied. You can see on the right hand side that was hand applied thermal lagging. So not all of that lagging would have ended up on the pipe, so beware of walls, floors, ceilings that residues could form on. But yeah, that one is highly likely you're going to come up against that at some stage. Roof voids, boiler rooms, just be on the lookout in those places. That is a large section of it in a warehouse. I think I was in Belfast a couple of years ago. Other places you can find it, so as I said, boilers can be painted on the boilers, so anything, as I said, it gives off heat, it could have been applied to. So just be on the lookout. If you see anything suspect on a pipe, boiler, in a boiler room, etc., making sure you've got it sampled before you do any works around it. Right, moving into the last of our licensed product. There's a few more for you guys as notifiable. So this is what we call AIB, so it's just asbestos insulated board. Where can you find this stuff? The easy answer is everywhere, guys. Think of plasterboard, how we use plasterboard in 2020. You can use plasterboard for pretty much anything. It can be cut, chopped, installed in weird and wonderful places. AIB will have the same kind of areas that was used: walls, floors, ceilings, pop-up tiles. You can get them as drip trays on their tanks, etc. So this stuff, highly, highly fibrous. Just be on the lookout if you are potentially taking off wall panels or ceiling panels or anything like that. Okay, moving into asbestos paper, felt and cardboard. Asbestos paper you will usually find in two different places, sometimes underneath triple MF insulation on pipework. it is in there as an insulator. It's usually around the copper pipe and then the insulation installed over it. It's there as an insulating property. The other place you will find asbestos paper is usually sandwiched to the back of floor tiles or linos, usually in a kitchen. The purpose of it in there, lads, is for moisture movement. It stops moisture moving into the kitchen, etc. So one of two places you'll find paper and cardboard. Again, this will be notifiable for you guys in the south. Ropes and yarns. So mainly Chrysotile made. Remember we spoke about Chrysotile being a wavy, flexible fiber. So yeah, you will find this in ropes. Where will you find rope seals? You will sometimes find it around skylights. Anywhere that needs sealed up around a roof, sometimes you'll find ropes. You'll also find it in boilers. You'll find them in old AGA cookers, the big ovens, or yeah, ovens you'll get in old country houses. You'll find them on the doors of those sometimes. Again, this is all asbestos Chrysotile. So these are old fireman suits that would have been made mainly from Chrysotile asbestos. So still considered as a rope or a yarn. Okay, gaskets and washers. Gaskets and washers, depending on their makeup, as you can see on the left-hand side, that is an asbestos gasket that is in good condition. We would consider that probably a non-licensed removal, simply going in and bagging that off. Where it jumps up a work category for us guys is when you can see it sandwiched between two pipes on the right-hand side and there's a bit of damage done to it, and maybe it needs a bit of wire brushing or something like that. So we would consider that a notifiable non-licensed job. You guys are going to consider that as a notifiable job, okay? Friction products. So this is very, very unlikely going to come up against these guys, but if you're ever doing any construction work or demo works or refurb works in old buildings with old lifts in them, old lifts would have had asbestos breaks in them. So again, ensuring you're checking those before you're potentially removing a lift shaft or something like that, ensuring you're checking was there asbestos used in it. Okay, this is us coming into our non-licensed category. So for you guys, it's your non-notifiables. So asbestos profiles, cement profiled sheets. So I'm sure you've all seen these before. If not, have a look on the drive home on this afternoon. I'm sure you'll see one on a farm somewhere. Be careful with these guys because sometimes they can be double skinned. So if you're going out pricing a job to maybe remove a shed or something, making sure you're checking if they're double skinned or not. Sometimes if you're sizing it, you may get 400 meters squared, but essentially that's double. So it's 800 meters squared. So if you're pricing a job, I've heard a few horror stories of guys getting caught out with that. And then to dispose of the waste, that's obviously going to cost them. So just checking that. Other uses of cement. So we talked about asbestos being resistant to chemicals. So on the left-hand side, you can see a lab benchtop. So chemicals wouldn't corrode it, etc. On the right-hand side, you have got an ironing board. So they used to use a cement plate, asbestos cement plate, for your iron to sit on. Other things like tongue and groove, cladding, not so popular in the north. In the south, I haven't really come across them that often. I think once or twice in a housing estate in Dublin they had some. I know over in England these are a lot more popular. Cement moulded products, so you've got the likes of your flue pipes on the left-hand side, and you can see a tank on the right-hand side. Usually it's got that battleship grey colour, as they call it in all the documentation. It's kind of usually that greyish colour. Okay, textured coatings. A lot of guys will refer to this as Artex. Artex was the brand name that it was used back in the day. Artex simply stood for asbestos reinforced textured coating. So it's a decorative textured coating, usually applied to a ceiling. If you're ever doing work in social housing around Dublin, guys, it's, I would say, 90% of those houses. So again, make sure you've done your homework and your controls you need to put in place if you're doing any kind of refurb or demo or any works within buildings with a textured coating. Those textured coating, guys, the modern equivalents look identical to the asbestos containing ones. So just never take for granted on appearance whether it has or has not asbestos in it. Always get it sampled. So I'm going to explain at the end how and where you get your samples analyzed. So bitumen products, anything from bitumen to a flat roof, bitumen damp proof course. You sometimes get bitumen under sink pads, under your sinks, etc. In terms of concentration of asbestos, lads, we're down towards the bottom of this chart now. So concentration of asbestos is very low. It's bound together with a bitumen that makes it very, very difficult for the asbestos to escape. So in terms of risk, we are a lot lower now than we were with the likes of our pipe lagons, etc. Okay, moving on to floor tiles. So asbestos floor tiles, as you probably come up against once or twice in jobs before, usually they have this pattern. It's like a tiger stripe, as they call it in the books. They're very, very brittle, these tiles. They will snap really, really easily. If you're doing any works on ground, etc., ensure that you're going beneath like laminate flooring and stuff, because sometimes you will have these, they've just put a laminate floor over the top of them. Other things you will get usually with the tile will usually come with the asbestos bitumen adhesive on the right hand side. So for you guys in the south, when you're grinding a floor with asbestos bitumen present, that is always a notifiable job for you guys. That's a full enclosure, negative pressure units, shower units for the guys that are working on it, etc. So again, that's taken a lot more seriously in the south. That would always be a notifiable job for you guys grinding the floor. And then bottom of the chart, guys, in terms of risk and concentration of asbestos are your reinforced plastics and resins. So that's like your toilet cisterns, toilet seats, etc. Very, very small concentration of asbestos in them, and they're bound together with a hard plastic. Again, it makes it virtually impossible for the fiber to escape. So again, guys, we have rattled through those really, really quickly. I'm conscious on time here because we're at 12:30. So these photos I'm just going to skip through. Again, Roger will have hopefully a copy of this presentation if you want it forwarded on. I'm sure you can have another look. But I will move just through to our emergency procedures. So emergency procedures, what should I do if I suspect materials are present? So remember, there's only a risk if asbestos fibers are made airborne, so if it's damaged or disturbed. If you see a material which you've reason to believe contains asbestos, it has been damaged, and you believe there is a serious risk of exposure to fibers, you should ask everyone to leave the area. Remember not to create more of a risk to people, for example, causing a panic or leaving something in an unsafe condition. Remember that minor damage to some asbestos materials do not always mean that there is a serious risk or that immediate evacuation of the area is warranted. For example, minor damage to materials securely bound in a matrix, i.e. your non-licensed products. So remember, they're all bound together with like a bitumen, a cement, keeping it all together, or reinforced plastic, such as textured coatings on your asbestos cement. In any case, you should notify the employer or occupier immediately. No further work should take place until the area is safe. So that means that action appropriate to the risk has been taken. What to do if you uncover or damage asbestos? So remember, stop work immediately. Decide who must do the work. Is it a licensed contractor? Could you do it yourself? Minimize the spread of contamination to other areas. Keep exposures as low as you can and clean up the contamination. Avoiding the risks of asbestos. So we're nearly done, guys, just a few minutes and we'll be done. Before commencing work, establish if asbestos has been identified. So that's getting your survey or your register and making sure you know where it is. Knowing where it is and seeking advice on the precautions needed to be taken. So this is all in the planning phase of your job, ensuring. First question, has your building got asbestos? That's usually the first one. If the building has not been checked, assume that you might encounter asbestos during the works and be on the lookout for suspect materials. If you subsequently find any material or dust you suspect may contain asbestos, stop work and seek advice. This is about where we're talking about having things sampled and analysed. Every sample you guys take must be done using a safe sampling method, and it must be submitted for analysis to a UCAS accredited lab. So there's no good in just giving it to some boy and him have a look at it and say, there's no asbestos in that, you'll be fine. It must go through the proper analysis through a UCAS accredited lab. Okay, So that brings us then, guys. Apologies, I went really fast through that. If there's anything you want to ask, pop it into the questions and hopefully we'll get to them before you leave. Or as we said, you can follow us at the bottom of Facebook, Instagram. Don't hesitate to drop us a question. And back to Roger then. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks, Stephen. That's great. Folks, there's no questions through in the chat. Just when you have Stephen there, any questions about what he covered today, or jobs that you're working on, or things that you've come across in the past. And also, while you're thinking about that, just to give you a heads up, we have had asbestos questions in the past. They have tended to focus around putting you in a situation where you or somebody on one of your jobs thinks they've found material that might contain asbestos, and it basically asks you, what should you do? Okay, so it's those last slides that I see Stephen flicking back to now. You obviously have to go in a bit more detail than that to get up to your 1,500, 2,000 words. But it's really a situation that some of you might have had, where somebody comes to you, say, come and take a look at this. What do you think this might be? And obviously, you've got to give the 100% right answer, in terms of not turn a blind eye to it, not hope that nobody else sees it, or we'll bury it with something in the bottom of the skip. It's got to be the official line of how that's done. Those of you that work for bigger organisations, who have your safety officers and things like that, you might have developed your own in-house procedures. There might be something already documented what you're supposed to do if you find asbestos. So there's no problem in you rehashing what those state already. And those of you that haven't really had any issues with asbestos, it's a bit like what I spoke about a couple of weeks ago with accidents and accident reporting. You might never have had one, but you don't want to be going flapping, what do I do, when you actually come across it. So it's the sort of thing you're better having even some basic guidelines in place in case it ever does happen on a job that you're involved in. There's plenty of cases of prosecutions and things, by prosecutions of clients, prosecutions of contractors, of subcontractors, of owners of buildings, where they haven't done this properly. So that's all I wanted to add on top of that. Have any of you got any questions? We'll have Stephen here. Don't forget to turn off your mic, or turn on your mic, sorry, if you do. All good? Okay, that's great. Right, folks, well, as I say, just a reminder, we're back on Wednesday, 11:30. It'll be myself again taking the session. So just say thanks very much to Stephen, and have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you, lads.
Thanks, Stephen.
Right.
Thanks, Roger.
All the best, guys.